Welcome to another Kingscrusher radio show. It's Tuesday, about 9:10. So this is another show related to one of the greatest players of all time, Garry Kasparov, part 15. Okay, so hi all on Play Chess and streaming to YouTube. Hope the board is okay. Just check. It's pretty okay on my preview here. Maybe that's good. Okay, so the first game I'd like to show you this evening is Kasparov against Lajos Portish. And I think it's nice to do a quick bio just for convenience. So this quick bio is from chessgames.com. So Lajos Portish, last FIDE rating 2467. He's 79 years old. He's Hungarian, and he won the Hungarian Championship for the first time back in 1958, and in 1961 became a Grandmaster. In 1960 he qualified for Madrid Zonal for the Stockholm Interzonal. In 1962 where he came 9th. In 63 he had another Zonal and he came ahead of Ivkov and Larsen to advance the Amsterdam Zonal in 1964 where he came 8th. So yeah, he's got a great record of achievements. Check out his profile either at Wiki or chessgames.com. So he currently still lives in Hungary and is still active in local tournaments. And he's actually got a younger brother, Ferenc Portish. Okay, so let's have a look at this game. So this was played in Yugoslavia, Nikšić, Yugoslavia. D4 from Kasparov. We have knight f6. Let's actually add a kibitzer as usual and connect to live book. Let's add a kibitzer. I'll use Houdini, the magician. So c4 from Kasparov here. e6. We have knight f3, queen's engine territory. b6. Knight c3 actually is played, not minding the pin, and bishop b4 is the most popular move here, but actually we see bishop b7, and now actually the pin possibility is ruled out. a3, ruling out bishop b4. We have d5, and I guess from one perspective you could say, well, is this such a useful move? Hasn't black established a kind of binds on e4 quite with an extra move? Well, the bishop's kind of blocked in though. We have now c takes d5, and usually black does actually take the knight to keep the bishop open on the diagonal. This is more rarely played as e takes actually. Okay, so we have knight takes d5, e3, and now black plays knight takes c3. I think this is quite common, knight takes c3. Well, actually no, it's not that common to play that immediately. Apparently bishop e7, there's 400 games in live book with bishop e7, there's only 62 with knight takes c3. So for example, this is a common continuation to get this position. Then taking on c3, once it's prompted, we have a kind of Grunfeld position. So taking on c3 immediately is interesting. Is an interesting decision, you know, without prompting. This decision here after e3, just to take immediately without prompting, because who's to say white's going to? Well, the idea would seem to be to stop white actually playing e4. That would seem to be the idea here. We have bishop e7, check, disruptive check, and now bishop d3. So not only disrupting control of e4, the bishop is supporting potentially e4 now. c5, white castles, knight c6. We have bishop b2 in this position, bishop b2, strengthening the center. It looks for the moment the bishop's kind of hemmed in, but it's not going to be hemmed in for long once c4 is played later, you'd think. Rook c8. We have queen e2. Queen e2. Now for the moment, I think the next move is not necessarily evil, but just put a rook in the center might be better. And in fact, that's what happens here. Forget e4 here. Kasparov carefully puts a rook in the center. Just to make sure of this, are there any tricks? If e4 is played, you might think that's a move. Possibly knight a5 is a nuisance. Possibly, with the idea of c4 later. Okay, so the pawns are kept there for a moment. Rook ad1. And actually, that kind of rules out a move like knight a5, because then we would have d takes, and for threatening, bishop takes and rook takes. So that's kind of, that would be risky for black to do this. I mean, he could play a move like this, but it's kind of involving risk to lose a pawn like that. So okay, rook ad1. It kind of puts, pardon me, it kind of puts black off a move like that, which might seem thematic. Just kind of get a grip on the light squares. Okay, but here after rook ad1, we see queen c7. And yes, there's still a possibility that black might want to play a move like knight a5 and c4 and just get a hold of the light squares here, maybe. Well, not necessarily bishop d5 because that would run into e4, but there's a possibility of that sort of thing. Knight a5. We see c4. So yeah, liberating the bishop potentially. It looks dangerous on this diagonal. C takes, e takes. Now, these hanging pawns, are they vulnerable? This is a big, like, from a theoretical perspective. Sometimes, are they a liability or are they an asset? Well, actually, after knight a5, we get, this is a very, very interesting example of the hanging pawns. Because, yeah, what of this pressure on c4? There's two pressure points, c4 and f3, in fact. Both together, white doesn't want doubled pawns. It doesn't want to lose c4 necessarily. So this is a very interesting position. These hanging pawns seem vulnerable right now. But there's an interesting move here which kicks off things very, very energetically indeed in this position. Very energetic move, a liberating move. If I gave you that as a clue, how many of you are awake? If I said white to play here, what would you play in this position? So you've got these, the so-called hanging pawns. What would you play in this position? You know this? Well, it seems, yeah, it's a worse case than even having an isolated pawn. With an isolated pawn, well, you can get some attacking opportunities, but maybe the same kind of property exists for hanging pawns. You know, this structural liability you can sometimes accept, but if you can get dynamic compensation, then that's interesting. But what we're about to witness is quite extraordinary, actually, quite extraordinary. d5, and if you look at this position, look at these bishops, they're actually pointed at black's king side. There's no defensive knight on f6, right? Now, there's a couple of possibilities at least for black that you might want to consider, as well as e takes. For example, why not just take on c4? Well, black took here. Now, if knight takes c4, queen e4 might be one of the better moves. Threatening mate So if g6, this is interesting because it opens up the diagonal. We can have bishop takes, queen takes. Now queen e5, threatening mate. And if black's forced to play f6, white actually gets a good advantage here. This position after rook c1, it actually gets to be a nice advantage. Black cannot take on d5 because rook takes c8. We'll be winning the queen on bishop takes. And if black's queen is forced to go back, then d6 here, and black's tied up in knots in this position. This is just horrible. For example, bishop takes is losing, virtually losing here. Well, that's basically losing a piece. And if b5 trying to pin there, this position is also good for white. If rook takes, if we just follow this a bit further, bishop takes, holding d6. Yeah, this position is just ends up being crushing. So you get a general gist of things that actually, yeah, this knight takes c4 would trigger off a chain of bad events for black's king safety that we've just seen, weakening the dark squares, forcing black into a move like f6, losing e6, and then this pawn then becomes very dangerous. So black maybe didn't fancy that stuff once start calculating it, perhaps, and went actually for e takes d5, which was probably like a lesser evil decision. There's nothing which seems to be that straightforward for white to do here. And in fact, after c takes d5, maybe black thinks now that taking on d5, what's the worst that can happen? It's just an exchange of bishops. If taking on d5, is the king slightly compromised? Is it compromised enough? If that pawn is left, then this could be a right pain to black. He did actually take this pawn. If he leaves that pawn, example, say black leaves the pawn on d5, let's play a move like this, then yeah, the bishops look quite menacing here in any case. Move like queen e4 again, creating dark square weaknesses. This is unpleasant, e.g. queen d4 is unpleasant, queen g4 threatening things like bishop takes g6. It's just really unpleasant. And in fact, there's even this sort of thing to get into e6. So that's really unpleasant to leave that pawn there. It's actually taken off immediately. Black just takes this off immediately, voluntarily weakening the dark squares. Again, it's not great. For example, this bishop moves somewhere. This position with the bishops pointing at the king side, a move like knight g5 would seem in some cases to be crude, but not here actually. There's very dangerous threats like knight takes h7 and mating like this. Just to put that on the board, what I'm talking about is something like this. We see the bishops are working very, very well together. So just knight g5 is actually a fantastic move here. This doesn't help. This is just crushing this stuff. If knight takes h7 doesn't work because of bishop h6, knight e4 might be better in this particular position. The idea of getting into f6, it's horrible. So basically, yeah, black doesn't like the look of this, doesn't like the look of these queen e4s in particular. So taking the pawn does stop at least queen e4, which causes that bad reaction of the dark squares. So it's taken, and it seems like just for the moment it's just an exchange of bishops, right? It's just like, okay, what has black lost exactly? He's taken out, from a fundamental perspective, hasn't he just taken out white's bishop pair? It's the bishop pair causing a lot of damage. Black hasn't compromised the dark squares, right? His king's out and about, sure, his king is out and about, and immediately, you know, you don't want all these checks like rook h5, so the king's tucked back in bed with king g8 and wants to get on with a peaceful sleep now until the rest of the game, right? The king's gone back to bed, no problem. The bishop pair's been removed, no problem. g6 hasn't had to be played. Queen e4, there's no sting to it, right? That's all gone. The light square bishop's gone. In fact, black has that c file. In fact, white can't even play this because then black would just crash down, right? With queen takes c1 maybe, or even just, if that doesn't work, just queen b7. So anyway, I mean, rook c1 might be a move, actually, a good move. But actually another move is played in this position, which is really interesting at move 21. So white to play here. Can you guess what white plays in this position? So you've been robbed of your bishop pair. It looks as though the king's kind of safe. You haven't managed to create any weaknesses. What you have done is get rid of your hanging pawns. Note, with the removal of the hanging pawns, the center has been blown wide open. With that center wide open, these pieces stretch quite far, don't they? What would you play in this position? But by the way, can I say hi, Oliver? Is this FM, Oliver? Hello, Oliver. Is Oliver an FM? I might know him from somewhere. Do we exchange correspondence somewhere? All right, okay. Anyway, okay, white to play here. We have this move bishop takes g7 being played. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Yeah, it's not giving the king much rest. Whatever this does, it's waking up the king from its slumber. Now, actually, this might not have been the only way to play the position here. There might be some other interesting possibilities as well, which is kind of dangerous. I mean, rook h5 was mentioned earlier as well. I mean, rook h5. Can we do anything with rook h5? If we had another move, we might have some crude stuff going on. I mean, this is pretty dangerous. If queen c2 here, this is a dangerous position. After knight e5, threatening things like queen h4. It's pretty dangerous. If here, g4, giving the king some air. This position would be dangerous once the checks go. White would be threatening queen h4. Yeah, I mean, there's dangerous stuff with rook h5, but Kasparov didn't want to get into that. So he sacks this bishop. I mean, it's a great position anyway. He sacks the bishop. So what's the point of this? Knight e5 now is played. This gives room for the queen, vacates f3 for the queen to look at g4, checking on g4. That's the idea, to check on g4. How can black parry this? You might think, well, hang on a sec, what about, is f5 any good? It's not so hot. Rook d3, we've got things like this. And if something like this check is a killer check. Yeah, that's not so hot to play f5. Black tries to centralize a bit, which is logical sometimes. Rook fd8, challenging that attacking rook. We have this check, and actually with this current interruption along here, we have queen f5 threatening crudely mate, forcing black to do something about this. Okay, if the bishop moves, this isn't good. f6 was played. If the bishop moves, here, queen f6 threatens knight g6 check, and nasties like, you know, the check after, or mating here. So knight g6 is dangerous. If, say, takes, rook takes, threatening queen h8, this is horrible for black. There's no escape from the viciousness of the queen on f6. Yeah. So, okay, this is dangerous. So f6 was played. Now we see a check here. And this is actually really in white's favour, even though it's rook against knight and bishop. This is so dangerous for black's king around here. Example, well, black actually gave back some material. If king f7, then check as an example. And here, there's moves like rook e1 check, drawing the king out. And that's crushing, because here, it's mate in 2. This sort of thing is not to be advised. That's checkmate there, because the knight's holding c5. So yeah, that sort of thing is too dangerous to play king f7. On king g7, there's things like check, and simply rook e1 would be strong, so threatening all sorts of things. Black's king is too exposed here, so black bit the bullet actually and just tried to give back some material with rook takes d7. We have rook takes d7, and now trying to get the queens off with queen c5, but the queen here plunges in with queen h7. And the simple threat is just rook e1, building up pressure along e7 to coordinate on e7 here, rook e1. This rook's tried to be evicted with rook c7. Check. And there's a very powerful move in this position. Indeed. It does seem to be one of the more accurate moves. Okay, what would you do here if you had this attacking position? I know it's an interesting material imbalance. On pawns, actually white's pawn up, but forget the pawns for a moment. White's play here. So what it does seem to be liked by engines as well. It's what Kasparov played in this position. It does seem to be, in some way, it's one of the more accurate ways of playing things. What would you play in this position? Any ideas? As I pour some water. There's actually rook d3, so keeping the rooks on, but the rook can threaten to come in here, right? That's key to this, that the rook's use of the third rank, and that g7, that's the coordination square. We have knight c4 for the moment. Now the other rook stands guard on the d file, so remember we've still got things like this rook switching across, or queen h7 check and the rook switching across. The knight seems to be permitted to centralize for a moment, which you'd normally think is a good idea, right? But check. I mean, maybe this wasn't greatest, maybe bishop d6 apparently might, I don't know, or knight d6. But anyway, we have this, it seems to be logical to centralize the knight, but we have a bit of a king chase going, queen h7 check. This is really annoying. If king, okay, let's have a look. If king e8, this is actually a mate in 3, this position, because check, and whatever black puts in front, it's going to be a mate on d8. Whatever black puts in front, it's always a mate here. So that wouldn't be such a clever move. Okay, to go to e8, and on f8, just a mate in 2 actually, with rook d8 check. Yeah, so this black has to tread very carefully. His king, unfortunately, has to venture up the board. We have check. Yes, this is not... this game is not celebrated as much as Kasparov Topolov, but it's still a bit of a king chase, driving the king out of bed into the middle of the street where there's these roaming rooks. Very dangerous. This is not what the king wanted. Now there's another great move, drawing the king further down the board, so we have a major king chase here. White play here. What would you play in this position to pursue the king chase? Okay, it's actually the move g4 check, which, yeah, wanting to like decentralize. But if knight takes, there's just good is probably rook d5. That's good for white, just winning the queen. But actually, there also exists a mate in 4 with just check, even better. Because here, queen takes g4 is going to be mate in 2, whatever happens next. That's too much. Too much. Yeah. So yeah, can't be taken. We have king f4. But this is actually very bad for black. This is actually a forced mate off the check. It's a forced mate in 4. Queen b3 check, another very accurate move. And black resigns here. Yeah, he resigned. His king is doomed. If the king moves here, it's mate. And if the queen goes here, it's weakening that d5 square. And we have, in fact, queen d5 check, queen e4 check, and then it's still going to be mate on e3. Yep. So this is a game which is extremely brutal, showing you don't want to give Kasparov the hanging pawns, because essentially what he did was sacrifice them like ballast, being thrown off a ship. I think that's right. I've never actually been on many ships, but he just threw his hanging pawns off the ship and actually threw his bishops, well, both decimated black's king safety, and then with his rooks and queen chased that king down the board to the checkmate. And Kasparov makes it look really easy. I mean, we can all dream of doing this, but as we find to our horror, if we try and play games like this against strong players, probably the opposite happens. Yeah, because they're so resourceful. But in Kasparov's hands, he makes it look easy, right? But when you try and do it, don't worry, the opposite will happen, because there's a difference between looking at games like this and actually playing them, and that's a horrible truth. But what we can do with great confidence and certainty is to enjoy a game like this as a bit of music, right? With a bit of music, you can listen into it, you enjoy it. Yeah, it could be from 20 years ago. We can enjoy this game at least, even if we're never going to play it. But it did seem to hint that in some abstract level, the hanging pawns can simply be sometimes the precursor to a major attack. This is a classic example of that. I hope you enjoyed this game. I've got another game to show you. It was 1 fun, 10 boring. Give me a bit of a vote there on this game. I've got another game to show you. Kasparov himself has also commented on this game. It's been quite a bit sing on this particular game. Okay, Leboyevich. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that at all well. I think I've heard the name Leboyevich on TV once. Leboyevich against Kasparov. Again, Nigsik 1983. Let's have a look at this game. Now, Leboyevich Let's get pronunciation from chessgames.com.
Любомир Любоевич.
Yeah, you don't pronounce the, although it's LJ, you don't, that's silent. So it's like
Любомир Любоевич.
you see that silent G JU. You see it's silent in both cases.
Любомир Любоевич.
Interesting, isn't it? So anyway, he was born in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. He's 66 years old. He was born in 1950. 66 years old. His last FIDE rating was quite high, actually, at 2571. So he was awarded the IM title in 1970 and the GM title in 1971. He placed first in the Canadian Open of 1974. He was Yugoslav champion in 1977 jointly and in 1982, just a year before this game. By the early 1980s, he was ranked third in the ELO rating list, but he never succeeded in reaching the candidate stage of the World Championship. This was partly due to unsteadiness and opening experimentation. On his day, he was dangerous to anyone, but a lack of consistency prevented him from making any impact on the World Championship cycles. He did achieve a number of strong tournament victories, including Linares 1985, shared with Robert Hübner, Brussels 1987, shared with Kasparov, Belgrade 1987, Barcelona 1989, and Melody Amber 1993. There's a good wiki article on the Boyevich. Okay, let's have a look at this game. So, Kasparov was black. Let's have it from black's perspective. So, someone's saying Boyevich is a Serbian GM. I'm taking my information from chessgames.com. It says Hungary actually here. Sorry, I didn't say Hungary. I didn't say Hungary. Sorry, Yugoslavia. Sorry, former Yugoslavia, Serbia and Montenegro. Split, doesn't it? This is like former Yugoslavia, yeah. So Federation Nationality Serbia. Sorry, let me just get this right. Yeah, if I'm just going to paste you something on stream here from chessgames.com, right? So Yugoslavia, the Federation of Nationality Serbia, okay, former Yugoslavia. Right. Okay, so we'll carry on. Onto the game. All right, so E4 from Kasparov. Sorry, from Ljubojevic. E4 from Ljubojevic. Kasparov plays C5, favourite Sicilian defence. Knight F3. We have E6. D3. So interestingly, Ljubojevic, he goes actually for a more timid approach against Kasparov's Sicilian. He just goes for a King's Indian attack style setup. He just plays G3, hoping maybe for a quiet, peaceful game with not too much tactics going on. D5. Knight BD2. We have G6. Both sides fianchetto. Knight GE7. Now a double fianchetto on this side. B6. Yeah, this B6 is actually a very popular move here. And here actually, usually players with white play C3. An example. So there's over 200 games of this. Example games like this, for example. Example game continuation. That's an example game continuation. So yeah, usually C3 is played here. C3. If castles, I'll give you another example. E5. Queen E2, Knight F1, and it's not so bad, this position. White's got a strong point here for a bit. That's another example. So c3 is quite commonly played in this position, c3. But actually, in this game, we have the move more aggressive looking h4. So black hasn't castled yet, right? Now, interestingly, Kasparov didn't actually castle. You might think, is it because of something to the h-pawn? Not necessarily. I'm not sure h5 does too much. I don't think this is the big problem. I could just ignore it. But anyway, he did seem to react to this h4, just playing h6. So if h5, we can actually just play g5 here in any case. So that's kind of reacting more to the possibility, it seems, of h5, just to play g5 if that's happened. If that happens. So now we play c3. So all he's inserted really from the main stuff is h4. He's just inserted h4 on a normal track. So with these two moves inserted, we're on a very normal track, it seems, just with these two moves inserted from what we've seen. So a5, this means, you know, later maybe bishop a6 at some point could be handy. a4, and now we have rook a7. This might look really odd to play this. Rook a7, knight b3. We have d4. Black establishes an advanced pawn on d4. C takes, bishop d2, and e5. Yeah, he opens up this bishop. This bishop hasn't wasted any time going to b7. It's already on c8. Why not open it up? It seems like logical stuff, right? And black would seem to have more aggressive pawn structure at this point. And we have this stumbly looking move, knight c1, bishop e6, rook e2. Here it does seem as though, if you look at this position, black's pieces do seem more liberated within this pawn structure because of the more aggressive pawn structure. They seem more liberated than white's pieces. In fact, this doesn't seem a picture of happiness to have a knight on c1, kind of blocking the rook and queen. The bishop's kind of hemmed in. White's kind of just passive, it seems, but solid. Bishop e1. But here now, with this rook here, why was this played? Can it really switch across? f5 is played. Pardon me. f5 is played. Can it really switch across later? In fact, an immediate idea is just to play f4 potentially. And you might think, can white tap into this f5? What if he did take there? You know, would opening up the bishop help? This position actually doesn't seem to help at all. There's no sacks or anything. With d4 under control, there's nothing that's that loose here. This position, maybe even black actually just plays f4 here, and this is quite dangerous. Bishop d5 later. So okay, there's no point to try and, it seems after f5 there's no point to try and take this. You might think, well, you know, it kind of potentially opens up the bishop. Actually, you know, the engine is suggesting to go ahead anyway to take this. This is actually an engine line anyway. Say this is an engine line. Let's follow it through a little bit more. f4. Let's say, even though that gives up the e4 square, what can happen here? Does white's king get in trouble, or is it just the dark squares here? It looks as though there's a big coordination point on f3 in this position. With these rooks like this, it looks as though f3, if we follow this through a bit, is going to be a problem. But yeah, generally, you know, black has to be a bit cautious about this thing, because it looks, if white can get away with this, he's got a nice e4 square. But whatever, he rejected this whole possibility. It's an interesting moment after f5 to consider this, just because it does in principle seem to open up things. Okay, but yeah, he played actually knight d2. This is very you know, everything's just hemmed in still. The bishop's just hemmed in. Maybe he's looking at the position from the point of view of just trying to cling on and be as solid as possible. You know, not giving d5 to black. You know, maybe that's part of his reasoning, that if he did take, although he'd be getting sometimes the e4 square, black would be getting that like d5 square, as we've seen in that example. So there is a downside of taking on f5, but this, is it worse? You see, the thing is here, black seems to be gaining a lot of space now after f4, and everything seems to be blocked in still. Is there an immediate threat here or not? This is another question. You see, black's also got the b4 square. Even on the queen side, it seems terrible, let alone the king side. We have f3. It just looks very passive. And now, in fact, f takes g3, bishop takes. That pawn on h4 seems a little bit unfortunate to be there. Doesn't contribute. Maybe it would have been more solid to be on h2 in this position. But here it's picked on with g5. Yeah, so black now threatens things like knight g6 to put more pressure on the poor h4 pawn. It takes on g5. And here is an interesting thing that happened. Black accelerates his dark square play massively. He doesn't just routinely take. If he did routinely take, that would seem logical, and black's looking forward to stuff like this. But actually, he really accelerates things. Here, if we have this position, just as an example, this is good for black as well, actually. This is good. I mean, maybe even knight here. I mean, this is all good for black. But Kasparov actually more energetically just plays knight g6. So he's encouraging, with the possibility of queen takes g5, not just this, but now queen takes g5, getting everything more aggressively. And he gives up this pawn, but this develops the bishop kind of on this diagonal. So now there's bishop e3 check coming in. So the dark side of white's position is the dark squares here. They seem to be coming apart at the seams, all the dark squares, key dark squares in white's position. He has to defend against bishop e3. That's going to be horrible. He plays knight f1. But now this rook switches across rapidly. Yeah, white's just sitting there waiting to be butchered, it seems. Rook f2, bishop e3, and white dare not take this bishop. He actually played b3, but this is horrible as well. If he takes this, d takes, the rook moves, knight d4. And what's happening here? If rook takes, queen g5 is a nice double attack. And if, say, bishop f2, knight h4, and just things are falling apart, basically. Yeah, things are falling apart. You know, it's like... So, yeah, he doesn't really want to, like, take this pawn. I mean, he doesn't want to take here to have that pawn in the first place, because there's things like queen g5 and knight f4 on the cards. He plays b3, but now just knight f4. At move 25, and this is just really hopeless for white. Black is what does white do here? What does white do? He actually resigned. Let's give an example. Okay, let's try and defend. I don't know, like this. Knight takes, queen h4, and white's pieces are all pinned here, yeah? So actually black could even build up slowly with stuff. Could even build up slowly. If here there's queen h3, that's checkmate. So say here to stop that immediate queen h3, it's just, I mean, you know, it looks hopeless. So it's just examples here how we could continue, and just like this, and then we've got queen h1 threatened. Okay, so back to, yeah, if we go back to the final position again, it's another game which Kasparov makes it look really easy to do this kind of attack. It's like white was never in the game. But if you try and do this against really resourceful, strong players, probably you'll never get this attacking position. It just seems another piece of great music to listen to, I'm afraid. To actually be able to play like this, I don't know, it takes a huge amount of skill. I mean, the whole thing is very well, it's very well crafted, but it looks as though this is also a symptom at the time of Kasparov terrorizing grandmasters, because it looks as though this is a really passive game from white. So maybe Kasparov's reputation, you know, terrorizing grandmasters and like crouched up like this, didn't help. It didn't really help. It was just mercilessly squished over here. I mean, this pawn sacrifice really tore apart and gave access quickly to the dark squares of white's position. But the knight's just stumbling around like this. This is just bad. The pieces are blocked in and just waiting to be pinned. These bishops are just waiting to be pinned when this rook slides over elegantly. It's just much easier to see this game than to actually play it oneself. It's, I mean, I assure you. So it's anyway. So it's like yeah, Chess Appreciation Society. But yeah, maybe some of you over the board and might be able to play like this one day. If there's a general pattern to pick up, it seems as though if the opponent's going to play passively, you can just try and swing your rooks in and squish on the king side. Yeah, it's there to be admired, these games. They're just there to be admired. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this week, and good luck in your chess, whether online or over the board or whatever, or just for the love of chess, looking at these games. Okay, comments, questions, likes appreciated, and see you next week. Thanks very much.